This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one. All right, brother. Well, it's been a minute.
Yeah.
Haven't seen you in a second, but
Yeah.
welcome back to the Be One Change One podcast.
It feels like we go in like fits and spurts. Like we'll go hard in the paint for a week and then we won't talk for 2 weeks, and it's weird.
Yeah, it has. It's definitely been that way this year. But we've both been busy, so
Yeah.
Yeah, so today I thought it might be a good opportunity. Just there's a lot going on, and we talk a lot about the importance of defining personal values and how to have some responsibility and accountability for yourself in your own life, and how to show up in the world that is in alignment with those value systems. And we had a podcast at the very beginning where we kind of broke down the difference between ethics and morals and values and all those types of things that got pretty granular on the differences in between those two. But I just thought it might be nice to go back and revisit a little bit of that conversation. But then in a broader sense, just to talk about, if you're making an attempt in today's world to kind of live, quote unquote, an ethical life, like what does that even mean? Or how do you even do it? Right. Like, and what are ethics and how is that different from values? And like, how do you even define those things for yourself? And so I thought that might be a good conversation to have, because it's not simple, right? It's very nuanced. And I don't even know if I have an answer necessarily for how to make it work, because I think in some respects it's still pretty individualistic for people and how you approach it. And I think it's largely going to be informed by your own personal value systems and how you define those things. And then ethically, as we talk about that stuff, a lot of times in that conversation that we've had in the past, that difference between ethics and values is ethics are typically more external things that are kind of not necessarily placed on you, but that you accept as ways to show up. There's professions
more widely accepted. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of more societal normish type things, maybe that you apply to your life. And there's professions that have ethical standards. In the military, we had a code of conduct that we were supposed to follow, that was the ethical way that we were supposed to demonstrate on a daily basis. Lawyers have ethics, you would hope, for the most part, right? Mental health specialists have ethical values that they have to follow or they lose their license, right? There's the medical profession has ethics, so there's these outside sources that provide us. Some people use religion as a way to define an ethical way to approach life, the golden rule, things like that. So, but what does that all mean? Like, and how do you actually fucking apply it? And how does that even work? And how do you distill down what really? Because if we're honest about it, right, most of us aren't probably in an organization or in a situation where there's defined ethical values for us that we're supposed to live by on a day-to-day basis, right? That have these external ideas of, how we're supposed to operate in the world or how we're supposed to show up ethically, and things like that. And so I just thought that might be an interesting conversation for you and I to have, because I know you've thought about it in some of the comments that you've made in the past with the conversations that you've had with your boys around just be a good dude. But what does that mean? And then in a broader sense too, like how does that play into that concept of masculinity and what is a man and how are we supposed to show up in the world? And so I just thought it might be nice to have a conversation around these things.
Yeah, it'll be neat to see where this goes, man. I haven't really thought about it in the terms in the I haven't really thought about it in the frame that you've put it in thus far. I've done some
'Cause my
surface level
logical
reading
mind
on it.
needs
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah. So I'm tend to be more of a let's throw it on the wall and see what sticks kind of guy. But yeah, hey, let's throw some shit on the wall and let's just see where it goes, man. It'll be interesting at the very least. And I know I'm going to learn something. But one of the things that stood out to me when I just did like surface level research on this and was just kind of using the Google machine for what it was for. One of the first questions that came up, it immediately goes into it immediately starts to point you towards stoicism and some of that ancient philosophy kind of stuff. If you just Google like the code of ethics or what is
Yeah.
ethics and all that,
Well, there's
it's
been
going to
a
immediately
ton. Go ahead.
it's going to immediately point you towards stoicism and the four pillars of ethics and virtues as they see it in stoicism, and that's wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. I think it's a good place to start anyways. Just talking about those four, if you call them pillars or tenets or whatever, I think it's a good place to at least start to frame how you view ethics, and if you can put your daily actions into one of those buckets, then I think you're at least you're getting off on the right foot.
Yeah, and I would just say for the listeners out there too, realize this, if this is something that you're interested in, like there is a ton of literature out there. There are tons of people
Yeah.
that are, considered philosophers that have done a ton of work on ethics and what it
Mhm.
means, and it usually boils down to a certain number of things, like you were just talking about. What were the ones that you listed off? Duty.
Wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Those are the
Yeah.
four pillars of virtue for
Yeah. Some
stoicism.
people will boil it down to certain virtues or relationships or consequences. Like what are going to be the consequences of the decision? That's called consequentialism, right? You'll see people like Immanuel Kant, like all these folks that have done a ton of research that have tried to figure this stuff out. And you just kind of, like you said, in some respects, it's almost like the values exercise where you just kind of have to do a little research on your own and figure out what resonates with you.
Yeah.
And then try to apply those things to your life. So,
but it also doesn't have to be that PhD level,
no,
dry, boring ass reading that Cass likes. You can do the Roscoe method and go to YouTube, man. Go to YouTube and watch a 5-minute video on it, and that'll lead you to another video, and you end up going down this rabbit hole. And that's in the shorter attention span of 2025, maybe some people gravitate towards that. And I guarantee you, because I've done it myself. You go to YouTube and just type in what is stoicism, what are virtues, what are ethics, and what does it mean to be ethical. And I guarantee you, man, you can get lost in that stuff, anywhere from 2-hour long podcasts to 5-minute little snippets on here's what Aristotle said and here's what Donald Trump said. And and I mean, you can get the whole gamut from both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. 100%. So let's just jump into it then. So like, how do you live an ethical life? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, it was funny. Like when I typed that in, I typed in almost those exact words into Google just to see what it would come up with. And this is my love-hate relationship with AI. This is the part where I really love it, because it condenses hours of reading and research into a few short paragraphs for me, and oftentimes gives me bulleted lists with the links for the source data, and I often go and read that source data. But one of the things that first popped up when I typed in those words to Google, oddly enough, and I kind of I should have seen this coming, but it referenced the Bible and the Golden Rule, and gave me two references in the Bible. First is Matthew chapter 7 verse 12 says, "So in everything do to others what you would have them do to you." So that sums up the law of the prophets in the New Testament. And then in Luke 6:31, it says, do unto others, or do to others as you would have them do to you. I thought that was it's pretty succinct, right? And it's a 2,000-year-old document that people have been living their lives by for a really long time.
Yeah. So, and those are, I think, good decision-making frameworks. And that's a good example too, I think, of how some people adopt ethical choices or decision making into their life. It can come from a bunch of different places, and religion's definitely one of them. And the golden rule is definitely one that
Yeah, but
people
bro, it
claim
doesn't even
to.
have to be religion. Like, we teach our kids this shit in kindergarten, for
No,
crying out
yeah,
loud. It's like, hey,
yeah,
don't do that to little Sally, because you wouldn't like it if little Sally did that to you, would you? No.
yeah,
Okay, well, don't pinch your ass because you don't like your ass pinched.
yeah. That's true. There's also the platinum rule that's been thrown out there, which is to treat others the way that they want to be treated, like to
Oh,
just
that's a
be
good one.
cognizant of other people and their intentions and how they want to be seen, or how they want to be
I got a
treated.
question on that.
Yeah,
I got a question on that. Restate the platinum rule again.
it's treat others as they would like to be treated.
Okay, that implies to me, just hearing it at the very wave top level, that implies to me that I have to have a working knowledge of what they want, of their
Yeah,
intentions,
of true.
right? So
That's right.
that implies that I probably have a relationship with this person, and we've had some discussions,
Yeah,
and they've at least expressed to me how they want to be treated.
that's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And I think it fundamentally too, it just goes back to recognizing that people have individual differences, maybe extending a little
Mm-hmm.
compassion and empathy, in certain social situations, or as you're getting to know somebody, maybe
Mm-hmm.
asking some questions to help guide you to understand that for them. Go ahead.
So I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
um, I feel like a kindergartner raising my hand. So if it requires me to have a working knowledge, or at least a little bit of knowledge of how they want to be treated via some sort of relationship or communication, or something like that, does that not also mean that that is an external influence? And we like to talk about internal influences and what comes from within us, which kind of gets us back to the golden rule. It's like, it doesn't matter so much what they want. This is what I do, right? I treat you the way that, I don't know. I guess that as I think about it now, just in real time, it comes out a little
Yeah. No,
selfish,
I think
where
the
I'm
way that
making
I
assumptions that they want to be
no,
treated the same way as me.
yeah, I think that the framework that I tend to view that through is you have we all have individual personal values, but I think those personal values inform whatever those ethical things are that we
Mm-hmm.
determine are important, right? So if like one of your personal values is compassion, then this is a rule that would apply to you very well. Right? Because if compassion is one of the things that you want to exude, if that's the way that you want to show up in the world,
Mm-hmm.
um, then yeah, of course you would then try to maybe the platinum rule would work for you as a framework or as a guideline, right? Because compassion is something that you want to demonstrate, if that
Yeah.
was one of your fundamental values. So I think it informs certain things about how we want to show up in the world. And again, those are just things that you have to define for yourself. We're not all gonna that's why if you do the Google and you see all the different versions of ethics and all the different
Yeah.
ways that people have over the history of time described what is ethical, what is not ethical, and all the conversations, that's why it's so nuanced, right? Because it's in some ways, I think, just shaped by our own experiences and then our own personal values too, right? So what's that going to be an extension of is kind of what it comes down to, I think, to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I think, you can get down to the nuance and the very, as you said, granular. That's a hard word for me. You can get very specific on things.
Granular.
Yeah. Words are hard. But if you wanted to just paint with a broad brush, this is where I went into, in my chapter in Work Hard, Don't Suck, was just be a good dude, right? And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a good dude? Well, it means do good things, like do the right thing. And then you have to get into like this discussion of, well, it's right and wrong, and but dude, it's like, if your neighbor's cat is shitting in your driveway all the time, the right answer is probably not shoot the cat, right? The answer is probably go have a discussion with your
Yeah,
neighbor.
go have a
Okay,
conversation with you.
so, and that goes, and you can bring this back to the Stoic principle of temperance, right? And having a little temperance on yourself, a little bit of measured response to the stimulus, right? And these are all things that I know we've talked about before, but when you start to tie that big O knot, you see how they all interweave with each other, right?
Yeah.
And you can go from Old Testament, New Testament in the Bible to ancient philosophers like Aristotle, to Work Hard, Don't Suck that I just wrote a few years ago. And you can see these same principles they started to just bubble to the surface and all that.
Yeah, there's a pattern to it. There's also another because I had to do some ethical stuff when I was going through my master's program, and one of the things that I remember was the 3-question test, right? So one of the things that you can do is you're trying to figure these things out, or if you come across maybe a complex problem or situation, is the 3-question test, which is ask yourself, is it legal? Is it fair? And then how is it going to make me feel after I do something about it?
I think that's a really good one right there, because that comes down to a personal litmus test.
Yeah,
That
right.
that challenges your values, and right, and
Yep.
you could even argue that the legal question, you could throw that out, because there's a bunch of dumbass laws out there. And
Yeah.
and when you get from state to
Still.
state, and when you get from state to state, some of those fucking things are stupid. I mean, some of them are legit, but there's some old laws that are still in the books that are just dumb as
Sure.
fuck. Like, and gosh, I had a book around here, one of those little coffee table like bathroom books, and it's laying around here somewhere. But it was about that. It was just like stupid laws in every state. Like, you can't walk your donkey down the street. Well, what if my donkey is my fucking emotional support animal? That doesn't hold water in 2025, right? Because of the
Yeah.
whole woke movement and progressivism and all that shit, right? So, anyways, I get your point, but I think that last one that you said is the one that we sort of hang our medal on right there, right?
What?
Is
How's
how
it
does
going to make you feel
how does
about
it make you
yourself?
feel at the end, right? Because
Yeah.
deep inside of you, if it starts to make your stomach gurgle a little bit and give you a little bit of anxiety, and you get that little sweaty feeling,
Yeah.
you probably want to challenge that reaction or that
Yeah, well, that's what
response.
we talk about being congruent and incongruent, and that's why the
Yeah,
defining your personal values is so
because
important because
yeah,
right? After the fact.
if you stole your homie's pen, you know that's not the
Yeah,
right thing to do. Now, if you borrowed it because I don't have a fucking pen, and you put it back, that's a different story. But if you just said fuck it and you took it and you walked away, well, that's probably not the right thing to do, right?
yeah, yeah. And so I think the thing that I think one of the ways to approach this too is if you're interested in kind of delving into this subject a little deeper for the listeners is it's something that when you got to do a little bit of research on, you got to think a little bit about, you got to kind of align it and tie it back to your own personal values. Because like I said, in a lot of situations, I don't think that there necessarily is maybe like a code of ethics or a code of conduct that
Mm-hmm.
you have prescribed for you, unless you're in the military or something like that. And even then, how many people actually adhere to it, right? Um, So take some time and reflect on that, man. And one of the ways that you can do this is build your own little personal code of conduct. Take some time to just think about these things and figure out what are those things that are important to you. Run this litmus test on certain things if you want, whatever works. And then just determine for you, kind of sketch out what your own little personal code of conduct is, and then try to apply that to situations into your life. And I think that'll help you show up in a way that allows you to feel like you're operating in an ethical manner. I think it's really hard today, man, because one, I mean, there's, it feels like there's corruption everywhere, you know? There's just a bunch of bad people doing bad shit all the
Yeah.
time, and we get inundated by that in the media cycle. Um, you know, it's almost like you don't even know what's true and what's not anymore. In AI is part of that problem, right? I mean, some of the shit that it can generate now looks so real that you're looking at something on Instagram or
It's
whatever,
going
and
to
you're
get
like,
worse.
is this even real? You
Yeah.
don't even know, right? So, um, and I think it's just with the influence of social media and the algorithms and feeding us stuff constantly that maybe bends us to a certain viewpoint. I think it becomes really tough. So I think building that for yourself is important, and it can be something that's as easy as just a little, paragraph that you write down that kind
Yeah.
of surmises the things that you think are important, the way that you want to show up in the world. Um, and really, dude, the thought exercise piece of this is the important piece of this, because how many people ever take the time to actually think about this stuff for themselves? That's what I'm getting
Yeah.
at, right? Like, if you want to be congruent in life, these are some of the things that you have to do. These are some of the things that you have to consider and think about and spend a little time
Yeah.
on in self-reflection and go, dude, yeah, what's important? How do I want to show up, right? Because that's going to inform how you operate in the world. And it's going to help you stay aligned and not get that icky feeling because you're making stupid decisions that after the fact you're going, oh,
Yeah.
well, shit, I wish I wouldn't have fucking done that. Right. So, And then, you know, if you do create something like that for yourself, then it's as easy as, you know, for the first month or so, maybe just in the morning with your cup of coffee before the world punches you in the fucking face, read that thing to yourself and start to get it
Yeah.
ingrained into your head, right? Because once you've read it for a couple of weeks, like it's almost going to be memorized at that point, right? And now you
Hmm.
can start to operate, like it'll pop up into your head. You'll start to operate from that viewpoint a lot more and a lot more easily than you did before. It's the same thing that we talked about with the values exercise. Once you kind of have defined those things for yourself, you'll find it coming from that mushy part in the back of your mind where, yeah, it was all back there somewhere, but it wasn't really, you hadn't really thought it through, to now it's, you know, kind of at the forefront of your
Hmm.
noggin. And now you're kind of operating in those values on a more consistent basis. Um, you know, and then you can even do little mini debriefs at the end of the night. You can have a little reflection before you go to bed and go, dude, how did I do today? Right? Like, did I show up the way I wanted to? Was that, did I match my intent? And if not, then go to task the next day, right? You're going to fuck it up. You're going to make mistakes. That's okay. We're not all perfect. And nobody's claiming that we need to be. But those are some simple things that I think that you can do to kind of start to take this nebulous idea of ethics and kind of start to crunch it down into something that means something for you and something that's actionable that you can use on a day-to-day basis and how you show up.
Yeah, I like that. I like that little debrief at the end of the day. Um, hang on just a second. Sorry, I didn't want to do that in the microphone.
That's okay.
I got like this thing in my throat right now. Jeez. Remember we had Josh Guerrero on back in the fall, and he had written down like this personal, what did he call it? Like a personal action statement or like a mission statement,
Yeah.
something like that. And we really, in the conversation, we sort of distilled it down to 2 words that you can write on your bathroom mirror that you see every day, and it was add value.
Yeah.
That's really all it was, right? And I think that when you start to really dissect that, there's a lot of nuance in there. What does that mean to add value? Who are you adding value for? And to, what are you adding value to? Is it for yourself? Is it for your community? Is it for your employer? And I think is it for your friend group? Like, I think you can really get down into some nuts and bolts on that if you break that down. And I think it ties right back into what we're saying here too. Um, when I think about adding value, like add value to my family, how am I adding value to my family? Well, there's a lot of things in there, man. Things that we were talking about in the pregame where, if you just go back to the mind, body, soul, emotion, finance balance of life, right? That at least I strive for in a lot of ways. Man, every one of those 5 categories, I can add value to it. I can add mental stability and security and leadership for my family by displaying some of these actions. I can be the financial, adding financial security because I work hard at my job and I've put myself in a good position through years of work and toil to get to where I am. So there's a lot in there. I think if you break it down into your social circles, I think there's a lot. How do you add value to that? Well, maybe you're the funny guy, or maybe you're the guy that buys the first round, or whatever it is. Just
Yeah.
in all ways, in all things. If you have that on the front of your brain because you wrote it on your fucking bathroom mirror and you see it every time you brush your teeth, that reminds you to, man, there's a system to life that I need to live up to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And this that dovetails nicely into too, like when I think of masculinity or when I think of what it means to be a man, I think that self-sufficiency and responsibility is one of those key tenets, right? And what I mean by that is, one, you have to be able to take care of yourself, right? And that's in all aspects, right? Financially,
Mind, body,
emotionally,
soul, man.
physically, right? Yeah, the mind, body, soul thing that we talk about all the time. But then you also have to be able to extend that care and that knowledge to the people that you love,
Mm-hmm.
your family, your parents, your friends. Um, and it also means economic viability, right? It means being able to provide for and support, your family to the extent that you can. But I also think that you should add value in the sense that you're a net contributor to society, right? More that you should give more than you take from, right? Like that's part of what it means to be self-sufficient. That's part of what it means to be responsible in the society that we live in. You know, you should be a net gain, not a net detractor
Mm-hmm.
from things. And so yeah, I think that's valid, dude. I think that's a great place to start, right? Is add value
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
whatever way you can.
No, and I think it can be something. I think it can be something very small. And let me give you an anecdotal example of something that just happened here recently in our house. Um, Katie was exploring this idea of wanting to try this new thing, and she was trying to communicate to me why it was important to her, and why she felt like this was going to be a good fit for her. The way that she said it, the way that she communicated it, I took great offense to the way that she said it. She used an example from our past that really, well, it hurt me. It really did, and I kind of showed that to her. I may have said a couple of things that I shouldn't have, but um, we didn't have like this big blown up fight or anything. We never yell at each other. It's just, she can tell when I'm miffed and I can tell when she's miffed. I came back here to my room and I sat for like 3 hours. I did a lot of reading and just, I kind of went to bed thinking about it. And, I can draw this now that I'm thinking about it and kind of putting it out there. I can bring it back to the Stoic ethics of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. And first of all, I didn't explode and get all mad and start throwing things in the house. And I tell her I want some coffee too. Um, wisdom, like I had to do some internal reflection and remember some of the things that happened 20 years ago and why she would have brought that thing up. I also had to go back to school a little bit on some things that I have said and some things that I profess that I, try to live by. I had to see the justice in it a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
is this right or wrong? Where do the scales tip on this? Is it fair for me to judge what she said at surface level without a deeper discussion? And then I had to have the courage to circle back around and have that talk with her the next day. And I did. I went back in the next day after I had breakfast and whatnot, and I just held her hand and I said, "Look, I want you to know that you that upset me yesterday. What you said." She goes, "Well, that's not what I meant." I was like, "Yeah, but that's what I heard, right?"
Yeah.
And so we that whole discussion on perception is reality and well,
Yeah.
wasn't
Well,
my
and
intent, but
intentionality too, right?
yeah,
There's
it
enough trust
wasn't my
between you guys
intent,
that
but you said these words. This is where my brain went with it. And so we talked about it for, I don't know, it didn't even take 5 minutes. And it was kind of over with. And I had to, sort of lower my defenses a little bit. And I had to
yeah,
go,
get your ego out of the
and
way.
go, okay, she's never told me no. Well, that's not true. She very rarely tells me no on something. A lot of times we have a deep discussion on, whatever it is, whatever harebrained idea I have. And she's very accommodating to my druthers and my wishes. I owe her the same, right? Do unto others. Okay. And you can see how this is all starting to tie up in that big old
Yeah.
knot, right? So after I sat back here for a little while and kind of calmed down a little bit and I read a book for like an hour just to kind of take me out of that space, clear my palate a little bit, and then I came back and I started thinking about it, and I was like, dude, like this is not what I'm about, right? It's not fair for me to hold this against her because it wasn't her intent. And so after we had that discussion, it was all good. And I was like, you know what? If this makes you happy, then yeah, go for it. We'll figure it out. Rather than, stick to my guns and,
Yeah.
come in there and be all macho and shit like, no, no, and
Yeah.
that's, that's part of marriage. That's part of being in a relationship.
That's
And that's part
relationships,
of,
right?
yeah,
There's a give and
I would,
take.
I would like to see her naked at least once more before I die. So, and she has the power to withhold that. So
There you go.
yeah.
No, man, yeah, and you're right. It all ties together, right? And that's a great example. So do we need to talk about should we have a little bit, and just to make sure that there isn't any confusion about that difference? I think we spelled it out pretty well, but I think we can be a little more succinct if we want to about that difference between ethics and values.
Well, I would encourage the listeners to go all the way back and listen to that episode. Give us a like and a subscribe and a review while you're there.
Okay. Yeah, I would just say that remember that ethics typically is going to be driven more from an external source, professional standards, the philosophy stuff that we've talked about. Where values are those internal, kind of internally developed things that are influential for you, that are very specific to you as an individual and the viewpoint that you kind of view the world through. And ethics typically is going to provide that framework for what's right and wrong in a specific context, social context, typically a professional context. Where values aren't necessarily tied up with what's right and wrong. It's just more what you consider to be important and beneficial for the person you are and how you want to show up in the world. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Any ideas or thoughts around how to develop habits?
Well, yeah, I mean, habits, sure. But if you want to get into like ethics and how that applies to this discussion, I think that's maybe a different.
Well, that's what I mean by habits is
yeah.
like developing ethical habits. Like how do we, if we define these things for ourselves, how do we develop habits that allow us to kind of align ourselves and be in congruence around that stuff?
By the way, when I say, let me figure out how I want to frame this. When I pick apart what people say like that, and I do it all the time. I read this book a while back called, oh shit, now it's escaping me. Fuck. Well, that was a terrible story, Roscoe. Shit.
It was called Fuck?
Yeah. I actually have a book named anyways.
I'm sure you do.
I got Nikki.
Let's
got
not
me
discuss it.
Nikki got me a lot of crazy books for my birthday, and some of them are funny, like How to Masturbate at Work and Not Get Caught. God dang it, it'll come to me in a second. But anyways, it's for the four somethings, and the 4 agreements. That's what it was. It's the 4 agreements. It's a really short book. You can read it in a couple of hours, right? And the very first one was be impeccable with your word. And I find myself all the time, people will say something like, wait, that's not what you meant, I don't think, right? Let's talk about that. So when you say any ideas on how to build habits, yeah, I got a lot of ideas on how to build habits. But if you want to distill that down a little further and go, how do we build on this ethical conversation that we're having here? Habits in general, I'll stand on my soapbox again and say, start small. Start with the little things, right? And it could be something as simple as picking up the popcorn that's in the floor when you're walking to your desk, or picking the trash up, or saying good morning to the people that you walk in, that you see when you walk in the mornings. It could be something as small as that, man. But circle that back to adding value. Add value in all aspects of your life. Lead from the front. I mean, there's so many of these platitudes that we can throw out there that all essentially say the same thing, and it's leading us to a place. Well, let me read this, and this will tie in. I promise it'll be a little bit of a discussion, but this will tie back. There's this concept, this Stoic concept that I don't want to even say it's a Stoic concept. It was a concept from Aristotle called eudaimonia, and it's spelled really funny. I had to actually look up how to pronounce it, because it's not the way that it looks. But it's often translated as flourishing, living well, or happiness, right? And this is from like ancient Greek stuff, right? Refers to the state of living a good life characterized by virtue, wisdom, and the fulfillment of one's potential. So if you distilled your daily actions down into those three buckets, I think you're in a pretty good, I think you're off to a pretty good start there.
Yeah.
Right? Virtue, wisdom, and living to your potential. Well, what does that mean? And you could break those three down, draw it on a whiteboard and break it out, man. Virtues. We've talked about the four from Stoicism. We've talked about values and how that ties into virtue. And I agree with your statement where virtues, ethics tend to be maybe at one level up from personal values. These are more things that are more widely societal accepted terms, and how we construct our social network around the world. Really, it's like, don't steal, don't kill people, shit like that, right?
Yeah.
And then you can break that down further down into your personal values. Well, how do I get to a place where I don't kill people? Well, maybe, I need to identify personal values that align with not killing people.
Sure.
And then the wisdom piece of it is stuff that we talk about occasionally on here is, man, stay engaged, stay curious, stay thirsty for knowledge. If any of this, if our listeners are listening to this stuff, I encourage you to go to YouTube. I encourage you to get some of the boring books that Cass reads. Go get a magazine article, whatever it is, and read up on this stuff. You might find something interesting. It may dovetail you into something, or take you off the highway, give you an off ramp into something else that's super interesting to you. You just never
for
know.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's just things that you have to put into practice, right? You have to start again. First, you have to define these things for yourself, and then you have to start practicing them, and applying them to different situations. One of the things that I think that a practical thing that you can do too, I think gratitude plays a huge role in this, right? Because gratitude typically drives us away from ego to a certain extent, right? Like if you use your previous example with Katie, you may not have been thinking about gratitude in the moment, but as you sat in your office, you probably started to recognize all the things that you're grateful for about your relationship with her and the things that she does, and the relationship that you guys have built over the last 25, 27 years, whatever it is. And that allows you to kind of remove that self-centeredness and that, oh, I'm hurt, I'm butt hurt, and so fuck that, I'm just going to come at it with both barrels cocked, kind of, so to speak. But I think gratitude, having a gratitude practice, or just being grateful for where you're, even if it's not where you want to be, being grateful for where you're at, can help you approach things in a little bit of a different manner. We talked about in the pregame, we were talking about, maybe you need to do a little social media audit. Maybe it's
Could
time to
be.
get off of the grams and the books and the X's and all of that stuff, and put everything on pause for a little bit and let your mind settle and clear from that just rapid fire algorithm that we all see every day.
I would take that a step further and not just say social media. I would say media in general.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That shit is a poison for your brain, right now.
It is, and it's just, it's so, there's so much divisiveness around it too, right? That it almost pits us against each other versus recognizing that there's probably more that we have in common than there is that we have that separates us.
100%, man. But once guys pick a team, then they're gonna fall on their sword for that shit. And what's funny is, it doesn't matter which team you subscribe to. Most people can't even articulate what they're pissed off about.
Yeah, exactly.
They're just pissed off because people told them to be pissed off. And man, I'm telling you, it's a lot easier to be happy in life than it is to be angry in life. Trust me, I've been there.
Yeah. And like we've said before too, I mean, I think sometimes, we're almost at this, and I don't want to dive too far off into this, especially because I don't want to offend you because you're a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but we're almost at this place in this country too, where like, it's almost impossible to determine what's truth and what's not anymore. And like, we've completely gotten to, I feel like anyways,
that's not a conspiracy, that's fact.
But I feel like we've also gotten to this point where like expertise doesn't matter. Because everybody's wrong, everything's a conspiracy. It's the Democrats hating on the Republicans, or the Republicans hating on the Democrats, and neither two shall ever come together, or and where the reality is that you've got people that are expertise in fields that have done all this research, all this work, and we can have debates over whether or not the research is valid. We can have debates over whether or not what somebody discovered about something captured the correct criteria for how they determined how those things were going to happen, or if it had enough data collected to determine if those things were going to happen. But
Yeah.
we've gotten to this place where like expertise doesn't matter anymore, and that baffles me. That just
Well,
it
but
completely baffles, and it scares me for where we're going. In some respects, for where we're going, when expertise doesn't matter anymore,
hmm.
then I guess let your mechanic do your heart surgery. Then, dude. I mean, if expertise doesn't
I,
matter, then
I
why do
think
we even need qualifications?
don't take this the wrong way, man, but I think that's a slightly shallow way to look at it. And if you just step back from it, you'll see that this is not a new concept. I mean, look at a everyday courtroom. Look at the O.J. Simpson trial. Look at anything that's happened, any kind of disagreement or he said she said in history, right? You're going to bring your expert to the side, and for every, I mean, you take whatever subject that you want to, whatever. Um, it really doesn't matter what's the word I'm looking for, Cass. Um, Whatever your issue of the day is, right? Whether it's anything from the Me Too movement to the Green New Deal or climate change, or it doesn't matter. Both sides are going to have experts. Both sides are going to have studies. Both sides
Yeah,
are going to have
I
their
don't
scientists
disagree
and
with
their
that.
lawyers and their air quotes experts, right? So and and I don't mean to offend you by saying shallow, but
No,
I'm saying that um, when you get down to the root of it, it's the messaging that you hear and which side you subscribe to. And I think it's interesting. Like, let's take the COVID pandemic for example. Some of the strong messaging that came out of that in the early days was very different than the messaging that we're getting today, 5 years later, from experts, from scientists, from doctors, from people who make vaccines and people who do this, that, or the other, right? And it's just separated by a little bit of time. And it happens to fit nicely into whatever political cycle that we're in or whatever, world discussion is going on at the time. And that's why I don't trust any of that shit. And you can label it conspiracy theory, you can label it whatever you want, but that's
yeah, well,
largely the reason why I divorce myself from any of that shit.
and
And
I guess the difference in the way that you view it and the way that I view it is the way that I view it is that typically, yeah, you're gonna have different points of view on both sides of an argument, but there's generally consensus on one side or the other from a community of experts. There's typically going to be consensus. You're usually going to have the vast majority of experts, maybe not the
mhm.
vast, but a majority of experts in a field that'll go, yeah, we kind of think it leans this way, right? I tend to agree with whatever that majority says because they're
Okay.
smarter on it than I am. And I
Yeah, and
trust the people that have that expertise and have had that education probably have the ability to distill that down to a level where if there's consensus, that's probably, just law of probability, that's
mhm.
probably the right answer.
I think
Um,
that's easy. I think that's easy when you talk about things like, well, shit. Let me see if I can come up with an example real fast.
Climate change,
Well, climate change, even though there's
the vast
interesting
majority, Roscoe.
there's interesting discussions on both sides. There's
Yeah. Now, how
are we
drastic it's going to be is that's completely debatable, but I don't
are
think that you can make an argument that it's not happening.
no, I'm not making the argument that's not happening, but there is also an element in there that says this is the cycle of the Earth.
Yeah.
Like, in 4.5 billion years, we've gone through this. We've seen this as recently as 10,000 years ago. We've seen this stuff. So it doesn't alarm me terribly that the Earth may be warming or cooling by X amount of percent every year. Now, are we potentially accelerating that? Yes. Where it gets weird and where we're always going to disagree is by how much and
Yeah, absolutely.
what's the impact and what's the fix,
And
right?
that comes back to the, control variables and the research that's been done and can you really capture everything that's going on? And
Sure.
those are valid debates, don't get me
and then
wrong.
and then put that on MSNBC or Fox News, and you get two totally different
You
answers.
do. That's
Yeah,
very true.
that's why I say turn the fucking media off.
The other thing that's different though about the way that you and I view things though is that I also think that like the example you brought up with relationship to COVID and how maybe um the rhetoric has changed over time. Well, yeah, that to me that makes sense, right? Because we're faced with something new. Science does sciencey things, and they
Hmm.
go, "We think this is the answer." And then as they collect more data over time, that answer changes. I mean, that's science. That's how
Yeah.
science works,
No, I
right?
don't disagree
And
with that.
so to me, like, I don't see that as like somebody was trying to pull something at the beginning, or I think the guys that were involved in that and the experts in that field for the most part were doing the best that they could with the information that they had at the time.
I
um
think that some of them were. Yeah, I think there was some nefarious shit going on as
well, and
well.
you're always going to have bad
Um,
actors.
and
Let's we can
there's
be
the
honest about
stories.
that.
You got stories out there from everything from doctors getting their medical license pulled because they subscribe to one therapy versus the other, and then you got guys getting arrested out on the beach during that period because somebody said that, we needed to round everybody up and put them in their house. Like, you want to have an ethical discussion? How many of those people that were putting handcuffs on motherfuckers on the beach thought that that was the right thing to do? Right.
Yeah,
And they had an opportunity to fall on their sword for it, and they chose not to. And we all did fucked up shit. Um, we all
we're
we
so
all
off
fell
topic
in
now.
line. We all fell in line to a degree, right? I mean, we all wore the mask. Some people got the vaccine because they were told to by their job, and some people looked at it and they said, "Hey, man, I mean, in order for me to provide financial security and this, mental and emotional security for my family, I have to go and get this. Uh, they're threatening me with my livelihood here. I don't.
Yeah,
I
that happened in my industry.
they've almost removed the choice
Yeah,
from me by I mean, you do have a choice ultimately, but I mean,
yeah, but
gosh, man,
still,
at what
right?
cost? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So,
exactly.
and the people who are making us do that kind of stuff, let's have an ethical discussion about that. Was that the right thing to do?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree.
and you can go, gosh, we could spend hours discussing that. We should go get a beer and talk about it, man, because
We can.
I think there's a lot of point counterpoint that could be made during that time. And
I'm.
regardless of which side you fall on that, I think everybody can look back on that time and go, dude, that
It's
was
crazy.
terrible. That was
Yeah,
terrible for a lot of reasons, because there were a bunch of people who were making decisions for us that affected us, that put us into a box and forced us to make decisions. And those people who were doing that to us probably weren't doing a lot of it for the right reasons. And I think that brings up an interesting ethical discussion.
okay. Well, we could have that conversation over
Yeah.
beer sometime if you want. I'd be
Hell yeah.
happy to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But let's get back on. I didn't mean to get us off topic like I did. My bad.
All good.
Um,
No, but hey, before you go with that, let me wrap this up. This was something that Google told me this morning when I was reading about the ethical discussion. I thought this was really interesting. Is when you start to think about ethics and values and virtues and how you want to live your day to day, step way back and go, man, well, let me just read what it says. It says, "Where do we fit into the universe and nature as a system?" And when you start thinking about it like that, it's like, man, I mean, take away the social construct for a second and just look at human beings for what they are. We're animals in an ecosystem that live and thrive off of the land and the fruits of the earth, be it animal or vegetable, doesn't matter, right? And start to kind of formulate some of your thoughts around that. And I think it really kind of brings it down to basics in a lot of ways. I mean, ashes to ashes, dust to dust kind of mentality, right? And how do I really affect everything around me by what I do day to day? How do I consume? How do I give back? Things like that you brought up.
yeah, no, that's valid. I mean, that's another thing that you can do as far as like when we were talking about developing ethical habits. You see people that do that stuff. People that maybe have that broader, more kind of universal. My how do we you know interact with nature? You look at people that are vegan, right? Things like that. That make personal choices
Mm-hmm.
to only consume certain things, or maybe not to take part in purchasing things from. You see a lot of people who may be concerned about the environment who are like, hey, I'm not gonna buy things from this company anymore because I don't think it's ethically sourced, right?
Yeah.
That's an ethical determination for them.
Yeah.
And that's another way that you can project that or exercise that in your
Meat is
daily life
murder. Yeah, that whole
as
thing.
part
Yeah.
as your own individual ethical habits, depending on what you determine ends up being important to you. So yeah, that's a great point, man. That's another habit that you can develop if you
Well,
wanted to, based on the viewpoint you have.
it absolutely is, and an example of maybe someone who may be forming an opinion not from an informed standpoint, but because of the messaging that they're getting, is a person who says something like "meat is murder." Um, don't I can't get behind hunting wild animals. Why don't you just go down to the supermarket and buy your meat like everybody else? That's a person who probably hasn't read into where does your meat in the supermarket come from,
Yeah.
and how does it get packaged into the Walmart supercenter. And if you start to dig a little bit on that, and it doesn't take much, a simple Google search will tell you that that's probably less humane than the hunter who goes out there and shoots an elk with a bow.
Yeah.
um, for sure. But it's the optics of it, right? And
It
it's
is.
the
And it's
messaging.
individual
It
choice too,
is.
right?
It's the messaging that individual has received. And what I would encourage people to do is, man, go read up on it. Go, if you're presented with an opportunity to form an opinion, try something that you processize well is look at both sides of it. Get informed on both sides. Try to argue both sides of it and then form your opinion versus
Yeah.
whatever the stupid influencer said in his 20-second reel on Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so then let's go back to let's just try to put a bow on this then. So if you're gonna live and so how if you were gonna how does Roscoe live an ethical life? What are the things that you do to try to practice some of this stuff? Or what are the things that you apply to try to show up and have live in an ethical manner?
Well, I sort of defined right and wrong for myself, and I think a lot of it came back to my childhood, growing up in the church and having that messaging over and over and over again of, what does it mean? What is right and wrong? And I think that brings up a good discussion, because what I might view as right or wrong may not be the same thing as you. And that can go all the way back to, the very beginning. I think that that's probably where I start, is with that one. And that's a giant bucket that you got to take little sips out of from time to time. Take the 10 Commandments, for example. If you just broke down the 10 Commandments, that's a pretty good place to start. If you took the four Stoic virtues, that's a pretty good place to start as well. And they're not terribly dissimilar. 4 versus 10, they're all pretty much the same. So for me personally, man, it's, again, just be a good dude, right? And try to think about the second and third order effects of your actions in a lot of ways. And that comes down, man, you got to spend a lot of time in your own head. And
Yeah, it takes a lot of
unfortunately,
self-reflection.
that's something that not a lot of people are willing to do. Now,
That's right.
I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that people just wake up with an intention to do harm every day. Some people might, sure. But I think it happens more by accident. Not necessarily malicious, more malaise, I guess, is probably the better way to. I had a commander once that framed it like this: says when bad shit happens, or when an event happens, it's either malice, malaise, or mistake. And I think this is probably not malicious. This is probably either malaise or a mistake, right? When people have something. But go back to that, what I said earlier about, if you do something throughout your day and you kind of get that little anxious feeling where you get that little thin film of sweat, or if it's something that you think about every 30 minutes throughout your day, that's probably something that's nagging at you, and it's probably something you could have done a little bit better at. And that goes into your nightly debrief. You come home, you spend 10-15 minutes just by yourself as you're laying there trying to go to sleep, and you think about that thing and how maybe you could have done that differently the next time. This is the debrief system that we use, root cause analysis, all this shit. Break it down into its simplest form, identify what it was, take accountability for it, and make some decisions around that about how you're going to act the next time.
Yeah. Yeah, right on. I like that. Um,
What about you? I'm going to pivot the table a little bit and put it back
Yeah,
onto you.
I think for me, one, it's informed a lot by my own personal value system, right? When it comes to the right and wrong piece of it, I think the way that I view it is also raised in the church, but I think that the problem that happens with some of the ways that information is given to us, at least in my experience in the church, was it's very black and white, right? There's right and wrong, there's good and bad, there's evil,
Yeah.
there's you shall do and you shall not do. And what I've come to find in my own personal life is it's usually not that simple. It's usually not that black and white. There's usually various shades of gray.
Hmm.
And it's usually a little more nuanced. And so I try to in those determinations so that I don't make in an attempt to not pass fast judgment on somebody's decisions or actions. I try to approach it with a little more what I would say is just emotional intelligence and compassion. Um, and try to give somebody the benefit of the doubt at least initially until they've demonstrated a pattern of behavior that shows exactly what their true intentions are.
Hmm.
But on the first instance, for sure, try to just approach things with giving somebody the benefit of the doubt and making the assumption that they're showing up the best way that they can. Um, so for me, it's I think it's in my own determination of right and wrong. A lot of that's driven by my own personal value system, but my personal value system also determines how I try to show up, and that's I try to show up with a little more empathy and compassion, and I try to fight that desire to go straight to judgment sometimes, um, and realize that in most situations, I mean, there are some things that are pretty black and white, but in the vast majority of situations, I think that it's a little more nuanced. Until I understand the nuances of those things,
Hmm.
it's hard for me to pass that judgment or to make it a full determination on things. And so I try to, I guess, just keep a little bit of a wider view, um, and try to understand, where somebody's coming from, or try to be a little more empathetic in recognizing maybe why they have the viewpoint that they have. What are how all those things have come to be, what their background is, the things that have driven that decision making process, or things like that for them, versus just jumping right to a conclusion. Which is a big shift for me, man, because I didn't used to be that way at all. That's just something that I think has happened to me over time as I've gone through this process of my own of self reflection and
Hmm.
you know challenging the messaging that I've grown up with. And trying to think through some of these things for myself so that I can determine what really does matter to me. What are really those things
Yeah.
that are important, and how do I want to show up in this world? So I don't know if any of that made sense. It felt like
No, it
just a
does,
bunch of
dude.
word salad,
And
but
I
um,
think I think you did a really good job of describing wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance in that in in a practical sense. The way that you apply those things, and you didn't use those words, but you absolutely said that,
yeah,
right? You're temperate in reserving the judgment for a second and really kind of squashing down and reserving that emotional response to something until you've thought about it a little bit and really analyze the input before you give the output. That's temperance. It really is. And I've been guilty of having a big temper in the past, and I think a lot of it comes with maturity for sure.
sure. Some of
We
it's
just
just exposure to the world too, and getting
it
your nuts
is,
kicked in a
and
few times.
knowing your role kind of thing.
Yeah,
You get beat with the stick enough. Anyways, um, I think a lot of it's maturity. I think we just kind of mellow as we get a little bit older, and I think there's that filter that gets a little bit better of what matters and what doesn't matter. I think that factors into it a lot. Um, the courage to confront things, or not confront things. That could be a form of courage as well. Like, man, do I really need to engage in this? Maybe it's just not worth it, or maybe I know how this person's going to react if I do engage with that. Like, I know that you and I can have disagreements on COVID and
yeah,
different political stances and things like that, and we're not going to harbor judgment towards each other. We can do that. Now, I
yeah,
can't do that with some other people. I can't
Yeah.
engage in those conversations. And so
Sure.
maybe a little bit of courage on my part is I'm not going to follow my sword with this guy because the juice
Well,
ain't worth
yeah,
the squeeze.
there's
I'm
certain
going
people that it's not worth having the
to
conversations with because they're not
exactly.
going to listen anyways.
I'm going to exercise some restraint here, and I'm not going to say
Yeah.
this thing to them, even though I really want to, and I could really drive home this point. It's probably just not
Yeah.
worth it, dude. You know,
Yeah.
the wisdom, you said that, you have to think about it a lot and research on it and inspect your own thoughts and revisit that messaging that you had and really think about what it is. And the one thing that I will say about religion, um, and maybe not even so much religion as just church. I think those two things are probably different in a lot of ways, and we can break that down later. But um, the church that I grew up in is way different than the church that I go to now. Um, the church that I go to now, dude, I mean, I wear shorts and flip flops and a t-shirt to church, and it's not so much about right and wrong. It's about how to be a good dude and how to live a life that's fulfilling. And if following Jesus and having some higher power that you can lay all your shit out on, if that brings you happiness, then go for it, dude. Versus
Yeah.
the church
That
that I
helps
grew
you.
up in, that, as you said, was very black and white.
Yeah.
It
It was very
was hellfire
prescriptive.
and damnation. And dude, my grandfather was a Southern Baptist preacher, right? And I
Yeah.
was laughing with Katie the other day. I said, I wish that you would have gotten to know him and go to one of his sermons, because he always started every sermon in a suit with a tie. And by the end of the sermon, his suit was laying, or his tie, his coat was laying over there, and his tie was all loose, and the top button was undone, and like he's sweating and Bible thumping, and it was great. It was awesome, and I remember the energy in those places. When I was a kid, I remember the energy in there, and everybody yelling amens, and it was good. And but the church that I go to now is very different. Very,
Yeah.
very different, man. It's much more laid back. And you know what? That I think is just a sign of the times in a lot of ways. Now, if you go to small town America in the Bible Belt, you're still going to find those black and white, wear your Sunday best, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening kind of places. Ours is more of it's more of a, hey, let's all just get together and feel good for a couple hours.
Yeah. It's building more community.
It is, man. It really is.
Seeker
In fact,
sensitive.
there's a movement going on in our church right now that's called City Shapers. And that's essentially what we're doing, man, is, be a good positive influence on your community. And you don't have
Value
to
added.
add value. Exactly, man. And Katie actually just texted me a little bit ago. She's on her way right now to she's going to a meeting that's about the different programs that the church has and how she can get involved a little bit more. She's finding some ways to engage.
Right on.
We've had this discussion about her finding some purpose, some new
Yeah.
purpose now that the kids
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
gone and everything. And this
That's
is,
good.
this is a good outlet for her.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, you don't have to go and like volunteer at the soup kitchen for this. There's a lot of
Sure.
different things that you can do, man.
Yeah.
So, just in regards of church, I think, hey man, explore the space a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well,
Find
and
something that works for you.
one thing that you just said prompted something in my brain, so I'll just share this as we kind of wrap it up, and that's just we all have personal biases, and I think that the more you can recognize your own personal biases, that's a great way to approach some of these situations, right? And try to remove that bias as much as possible, so that you can evaluate whatever that situation is from a more logical perspective. And that also forces you, I think, sometimes to try to understand another person's viewpoint or another person's argument versus just rolling in with, well, this is what I believe, and because I believe it, it's right, and I can't be wrong, and so that'll help you a lot in some of those situations. Just try to remove bias as much as you can, because we all have them, and really try to listen and hear what another person's saying, and approach it from that. Don't make it personal. And gather information and then make a determination.
Yeah,
That's
that goes into
that's
that
the best
wisdom
way to
bucket,
approach
man.
it. What's
Yeah,
that?
that goes in that wisdom bucket.
Yeah, I agree.
Research, learn. Man, I found a lot of useful value in journaling. I really did.
Journaling's another great. That's another great practice.
Because the thing with journaling, people say, well, I don't want to just sit down and write. Or you can use the voice memos on your phone to just speak what's on your mind, right?
Yeah.
When you're out walking around the neighborhood. I do it all the time when I'm thinking about plots or podcast episodes or whatever. I just open up a voice memo or the notes and the dictate function, and I just talk into my phone and just let my thoughts go for a couple of minutes, and then now it's captured. Right now I have it and I can go back and revisit it. But the thing with journaling that I love is I can open up a blank Word document on my laptop or on my computer, and I can just go to town, dude. And it doesn't have to be grammatically correct, and I'm going to have a ton of misspellings in there. But the point is, just let it flow. Just let that shit flow out of you, and it's just between you and the screen. Maybe the NSA is picking up on it a little bit. Tinfoil hat.
There we go.
Patriot Act.
Take that bias out, Roscoe.
Facts. But the cool thing is, at the end, now you have a decision when you're done. And you might sit there for 10 minutes. You might sit there for an hour and just let it go, man. Let these thoughts go. Like, a form of this is, I've done this before. I get pissed off about something. Doesn't matter. Katie, work, job, who cares, right? The dog's shit in my hallway again. Come back here and open up a blank Word document and just go to town, right? Get it all out. And it might be a page. It might be a paragraph. It might be 10 pages. Who knows? But at the end, I have a decision. Do I save it so that I can read it again and go back and revisit some of my thoughts?
Revisit your trauma.
And well, because there's usually always something to learn from it.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Whatever experience got you to the point where you felt like you needed to emote and get that shit out of there, rather than go and kick your dog and throw something through the window, you can express that on a page, in a diary, in a journal. I have your back here on my shelf, or a Word document on your phone or on your computer. And at the end, that choice is, do I save it to come back and debrief a little bit later after I've calmed down and see, like, an hour later after I've calmed down, I can come back and I can look at this objectively and see where maybe I've made some errors or where my thoughts were kind of fucked up, right?
Yeah.
Or I can just delete it. Well, that's the beauty of it, right? And that's the beauty of the journaling, is it's just between you and the page. Yep. And nobody has to know. Right. And I know, man, just good therapy for me is sometimes just getting it out.
Yeah, that's
makes me feel really good.
And you can be super critical, and you can use language that maybe you wouldn't use with anybody else, and you can, exactly. And the other thing that I've heard from folks that I know that do journaling and that has really been beneficial for them is it's similar to, like, if you've ever gone through a cycle in your life where maybe you got out of shape and you started to get back into shape, that progression of you getting your body back into shape, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a slower process, and you don't see the changes as drastically. Like, if you go into a fitness plan and you lose some weight and you start to build some muscle, 6 months down the road, you're gonna look at yourself in the mirror, and because you've been looking at yourself in the mirror every day, you don't see the change. You don't notice the starkness in the change that's happened. Mm-hmm. And the transformation that's happened, as opposed to somebody who hasn't seen you for 6 months and then now all of a sudden sees you and they're like, "Holy shit, dude, what's going on? You look awesome, man. You've lost a bunch of weight. You got some guns on you now. What's going on?" Right? Like, you don't see it. And I've heard that that can be the same thing with journalism too, right? Or journaling too.
You see the growth over time.
You can go back and you can go, "Oh my God, man, look at what I was writing about, the things that I was struggling with 6 months ago, or that I was pissed off about, and look at where I am now." Right? It also gives you that reflective ability to look back and kind of see how far you've come and the things that you've figured out about yourself. It's a great exercise in self-reflection to a certain extent.
I really enjoy it, man. And I remember I kept this journal on, I kept a deployment journal one time. My mom got it for me for my birthday one year. And I happened to be deploying like 2 months later. So I saved it. I didn't write anything in it until I deployed. And I started on day one, and I captured the whole deployment. Every night I would go in there and I would write. Some days I'd write just a paragraph or two. Some days I would fill up 2 or 3 pages. And I had drawings and newspaper clippings and shit that I printed out from the internet in there. And it's great to go back and look at that. Now it's been, 13, 14 years
Yeah.
since I did that. It's neat to go back and look at that and see those emotional highs and lows
Yeah.
throughout that whole, and just remember and go back and relive some of those memories, good and bad, you know, and things that maybe I didn't say to the individual, but I said to my journal, that made me feel good at the time. Right.
Yeah.
But that I would probably never speak out loud to another person,
sure.
you know, and that's the great thing about it is it's very personal. And you can do this nightly. You can do it in the mornings, after you've had time to sleep on it, which is not a terrible idea either. But I do really like that, as a debrief method, as a, what's the word I'm looking for? As just a way to get it out, man.
Yeah. No, it's a
Therapy.
great idea, brother.
That was the
I'm
word.
glad you brought that up.
Yep. Cool, dude. Holy crap. That ended up going down a lot of tributaries. That was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Always is.
I hope you're still recording. Your face has been frozen for about a minute.
Oh, no,
So,
I am. Everything's
right.
working on my end.
Good, man. You got anything else?
I don't, brother.
Sweet. All right. Well, we'll get back together at the end of the week, and we'll tackle that other topic. Oh shit, we got a date tomorrow too. We got an interview coming on tomorrow. Cool, man.
We do. All right, brother.
Well, if you got nothing else, man, I say be the change.
Be the one.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's be and the number one, change and the number one.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1 Change One on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.